episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. I don't think that I am breaking any news to anyone when I say that technology has greatly changed how us humans live, and I would argue, at least in the large scale, the influence of technology on the changes in human society have been for the better. Now, have there been some drawbacks? Yes, and we will get into that in this episode as well. But I figured we'd take kind of a walk down memory lane, if you will. Maybe not memory lane, but, just take a look back, see kind of areas where technology has improved our lives, maybe some areas where it has maybe made our lives worse, and then, of course, maybe what the future might hold. Now, that last part, what the future might hold, is probably going to age like fine milk because if you've been around the technology sphere for the past, 10, 15 years, nobody 10, 15 years ago probably would have thought we'd be where we are today. And just kind of the grows, leaps and bounds in technology has just been kind of astronomical. So it's probably going to age like fine milk, but that's part of the fun. But before we get into all of that, let's get into our trivia question for the week. So speaking of how technology has changed our lives, what year did the first public demonstration of a mouse controlling a computer occur? So when was the first public demonstration of a mouse controlling a computer? And that is your trivia question for the week. Now, before we get into this week's cybersecurity tip, I did want to touch on a quick news story that I found rather interesting, in large part because I think many people out there, have wondered what Apple is going to do with their versioning scheme. So, unless you've been living under a rock, every year Apple comes out with new versions of their various operating systems. And they've been basically iterating on them since the first year it came out. So when the first iOS version came out, it was, iOS 1.0, and then the subsequent year 2, and then 3, and so on and so forth. But, I guess macOS was a little bit different because they kind of stayed on specific versions for a while. I mean, they were on macOS 10 for 15 years or something like that. And then they finally switched to going a increment the major number every single year. But we always, at least I kind of wondered, are they going to keep this up? Is there going to be a day years from now we're at iOS 37 or iOS 24 or something like that? That just kind of sounds a little weird. Now, granted, once you get closer to those numbers, it probably sounds a little more normalized. I think if you were, say, back in 2008 or 2007, when the iPhone was first kind of becoming a thing, you would probably think that iOS 18 sounds a little weird. But that's where we are today. But anyway, apparently, the Lord and Savior of the Apple leak disciples, aka Mark Gurman, has spoken, so therefore it must be true. But kidding aside, he did come out with a report basically stating that they're going to be switching from, rather than kind of doing the iOS version number, so iOS 17, iOS 18, that kind of a thing, they're going to be switching to the year in which the OS released, or I guess the primary run of its release. So that means the upcoming OS versions will not be Mac OS 16, Vision OS 3, and so forth. It will be Mac OS 26, Vision OS 26, iOS 26, and you get the picture. Now, if someone didn't know about that happening, they'd probably be like, what the heck just happened? How did we jump, in the case of Vision OS, how did we jump 24 versions or something like that? But I guess it can happen. Apple can do what they want. Now, it's not crazy to do a versioning scheme like this. If you look at some other popular pieces of software out there, specifically operating systems, they follow a very similar format. Now, if you look at Windows, Windows is probably one of the most notable examples. Of course, Windows 11 stays kind of the same year over year, but the different, like, major, I guess, updates, if you will, are usually with some kind of, the end of the year, H2. They used to do an H1, H2. Now they only seem to do an H2. So last year in the fall, they released their major update, which was 24 H2. In the fall this year, they'll probably release their next update, which is 25 H2. So they follow a similar versioning scheme. But other operating systems as well, like Ubuntu is a big one. They have their like LTS, or their long-term support release, every 2 years, and that follows the same versioning scheme. They don't have like an Ubuntu 15. They do whatever the year is. So the one that just came out last year for the LTS was Ubuntu 24.04. And they're coming out with a 25 dot, I think, 10 or something this year. And TrueNAS Scale is another one. They also do the version based on the current year. So this year it's 25 point whatever it is. So it's not out of the ordinary to do a versioning scheme like that. So I just kind of find it interesting that Apple is electing to do that. I mean, on the one hand, it does kind of make it easier for the end consumer to know when an OS came out and how old it is. Because if you have, iOS on, say, like, 18, and you have Mac OS on 15, and you have, Vision OS on 2, it's like, where do all of these line up exactly? Now, for a tech person, it's probably very easy for them to identify exactly what year the specific version came out. Now, some of us will do some kind of mental math where we have a fixed point in our brains of, okay, we know this iOS version came out in this year with this iPhone, and then the current number that you're referencing is X number of years more than that, so that means it's this year's old. So very convoluted, very complicated, yes. But just having the year in the version will definitely make it easier for people to get an understanding of how old their version is, and what the new one is, and all that kind of good stuff. So whether this is a good change or a bad change, I mean, personally, I'm kind of, I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. I think largely for the consumer, having it like consistent across like the board, and lining it up with the year does kind of make sense. But like I said, I don't necessarily have a strong opinion one way or the other. But with that, let's move into this week's cybersecurity tip. So this week's cybersecurity tip once again has to deal with email. I know it's very boring at this point for all of you that are tired of hearing about email ones, but the news stories just keep coming in. But this one specifically is about not sending or storing stuff in your email, like personally identifiable information, unless you fully encrypt everything. And with in I would say like 95% of people that use email, that essentially means don't do it at all. Because the vast majority of people are not encrypting their emails. Now, there are edge cases, of course, if you use something like Proton Mail, or something with encryption built in to your email client, you might be using it. But for like the vast majority of your average user of email, you're probably not using encryption, unless maybe you use it for work, potentially, depending on where you work. But for the vast majority of people sending personal emails with their personal email accounts, you're probably not really using encryption. But the reason why this all kind of gets brought up was there was some news circulating, maybe about like a week or so ago, but relatively recent, of a cybersecurity researcher discovering an online database containing millions of usernames and passwords for well known companies, including Apple, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. So the database had over 184 million unique logins and passwords, which totaled to roughly 47.5 gigabytes of raw data. Now, included in this data, in addition to the logins, was also sensitive information such as bank accounts, financial accounts, health information, as well as, logins for like government portals in various countries and all kinds of juicy details. So the data was confirmed to be legitimate essentially by, reaching out to people that were in this database breach, basically just to, confirm, hey, are you so and so? Because I just kind of, found your information in this database. So that's basically how it got confirmed. But so the security breacher was able to trace down this database. Was able to trace its IP address back to two different domains. And then basically notified the hosting provider to basically restrict it and basically kind of lock it down. So not everyone on the internet can basically access it. Now, it's not entirely known how this database kind of got collected, like how all of these logins and various information got collected into this database. But it's theorized that it was compiled through some sort of info stealer malware, which is basically just designed to harvest data on the systems that it infects. So basically, how it does that is once it infects your system, it will target credentials like usernames and passwords stored in web browsers, email clients, and messaging apps. So basically, it'll kind of take a kind of a monitoring role on your computer, whether that's in like the form of a keylogger, like a screen recorder, or something like that. Kind of sounds like Microsoft Recall, doesn't it? Ooh, maybe that was too soon. But I mean, that's basically what Recall does. It basically just takes screenshots of your computer every second, and then allows you to search through them. Which actually, to Microsoft's credit, when they got all that backlash about it, they did kind of like pull the feature. Although I think they're now trying to re-release it again. But that's neither here nor there. We're getting off topic. Back on subject. The point of these info stealers is basically to record, whether it's taking screenshots or keylogging or whatever, and then sending that juicy data back to wherever its command and control host is, and then kind of dumping it in the database. Now, obviously, if there is a massive database out there, including logins for various accounts, as well as things like financial information and health information, it's basically just an asking for various sorts of cybercrime, whether that's identity theft, fraud, future cyber attacks. I mean, the list kind of goes on. But now that we've kind of run through the highlights, this is why the tip is so important, because if someone manages to get access to your email account, they basically have access to everything. Because I guess for one, if you're using the same email account for every single login that you use, like every single website you go to, I mean that's already one piece of information that the threat actor already has. They know your email address, now they just need to know your password. But conveniently, on basically every single website, there's a way that if you forget your password, you can have a link emailed to you, and then you can recover your password and reset it. So if a threat actor gets access to your email, they can kind of go through and reset your passwords. Now, this is why multi-factor authentication through preferably some kind of like either hardware key or two-factor app that you would have like either on your phone or some other standalone device is so important, because even if your say email gets compromised and they try to reset your password, it will almost certainly prompt for that two-factor code, and if they don't have it, you at least have that a little bit of extra protection. But the other reason why having your email be compromised is so dangerous is because a lot of people send some personal information through their email address. Now, whether that's forwarding on, personally identifiable documents for some kind of job, or maybe they have, sending, financial information to like an accountant or something. There's a lot of different ways where this personally identifiable information could end up in an email. And if a threat actor gets access to your email and is able to read all of that information, well, now they could just have a field day of being able to get whatever they want on you. Because if they can get things like, your bank account, your social security number, your address, your phone number, your credit card number, all that good stuff, they can basically do whatever the heck they want. Because most of the time, if you're trying to, call up, whether it's your bank or some other financial institution, they'll usually ask for some kind of way to verify that it's you. Whether they say, like, give me the last four digits of your social, or what's your date of birth, or what's your address, or some kind of question that theoretically only the owner of said account would know. If the person has access to your email and has basically access to everything about you, it would be very easy for them to basically pretend that they are you, impersonate you, and essentially steal your identity and do some not so very nice things. So yeah, that is for why your cybersecurity tip for the week is to be very, very mindful of what you're sending and saving in your email account. And that is your cybersecurity tip for the week. Now, let's move into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. Now, if this was any other week, I probably wouldn't have included this, but since I didn't really do much, I figured I would include it. Now, this past week, of course, was Memorial Day weekend for us here in the United States, and I celebrated by doing some traveling, so as such, I didn't really have a whole lot of time to do a ton of nerdy things, but I did want to touch on something that was kind of interesting. I had a ongoing fight with my good old friend YouTube. So apparently, YouTube doesn't take too kindly when you use an application like YTDLP, or essentially the YouTube downloader, which is a command line tool for basically downloading YouTube videos. You can do a bunch of other stuff too, like you can extract audio from videos and download in different formats, and it's a very versatile tool. But anyway, apparently trying to download multiple videos in a very short time window, YouTube doesn't take too kindly to. Now, in my defense, I was not doing it for any kind of malicious purposes. I was basically just trying to find something interesting to watch on the plane. That I was gonna be in an airplane for a while, and I didn't feel like paying the airline for internet. Plus, I don't even know how good uh, internet is on airlines, but if it's like their food, it's probably not good. Yes, I did insert how about that airline food joke. But needless to say, I wanted some entertainment, so I was looking for some YouTube videos that would interest me, and then basically just watch those on the plane. So I got through a decent number. I don't remember how many I got through before I kind of started running into issues. But I hear already some of you might be asking the question, um, for anyone trying to download YouTube videos, why don't you just use YouTube Premium and then you can just download the videos for offline viewing? And my response to that is, first off, fair point. Second off, heck no, because I am not giving Google any of my money. Um, I have a I'm trying to figure out what the best way to phrase this is, but I have a very I guess antagonistic view towards Google just because of what their business model is. But it's not just exclusively to Google. It's other kind of big tech companies too, like Facebook. I love to clown on them, or I guess their name is Meta. Love clowning on them. But because they essentially just harvest as much user data as possible and sell it off to the highest bidder, and they're obviously doing very well for themselves. I really don't want to give money to support something like that, so that's why I'd rather not spend buy YouTube Premium. But I can also hear the Linus Tech Tips argument of by essentially downloading videos from YouTube and not watching the ads in any way, that is somehow piracy because you are consuming the content without ads. Now, I'm not going to get into that debate per se. There are plenty of good, I guess, rebuts to that debate. Of course, you can listen to Linus's explanation itself. But suffice it to say, there are numerous content creators out there that have said on numerous occasions that engaging with their sponsors and doing things like buying their merch impacts them way more than you just watching the ads on a YouTube video. Like basically, the ads on a YouTube video, they're basically not going to notice that, especially compared to, say, if you buy, like a t-shirt or something from them, because the amount of videos that you would have to watch with ads to basically account for the same amount of, say, buying a t-shirt from them is like astronomical. People have done the math on this, and it is crazy. It's a lot more than you might initially think, because YouTubers don't really get that much from ads on videos. Like the number, I believe how it's broken down is it's like cents per million view, or not per million, per thousand views or something like that. I think that's how they break it down. So it's like if you have a video on YouTube that gets, say, like for basically every, say, 1,000 views, you might get like a couple cents, which obviously isn't a whole lot. But again, so you're just one of those like 1,000 views. Again, if you just like, bought a t-shirt or something, that's what, like maybe 25, $30 somewhere in there. That goes basically directly into the creator's pocket. Now, sure, depending on how they do their merch, there's probably someone else kind of taking a cut for it, so they don't get the full value of what the t-shirt is, but what they do get is going to be significantly more than what you would get, or what they would get if you just, watched a video with ads. But there's also other things you could do too, like, if they have like a Patreon page or some other way that you can support them through some kind of membership, you could do that as well. So suffice it to say, I don't necessarily think downloading a YouTube video for offline viewing is necessarily a bad thing, but because, like I said, there are so many other ways that you can support them. But anyway, back on topic. When I was trying to download some of these videos, I was getting 403 errors when I was trying to download some of the videos. And apparently, YouTube has some sort of mechanism in place to block either on a temporary basis or a permanent basis based on your IP address. Now, I first realized this when I happen to be using my cloud VPN that I have. I self-host my own VPN in the cloud, so I can, have a kind of a remote ad-free access point if I don't feel like remoting into my home network. Typically, if I need something with some more faster speeds, because my home network speed is limited by my upload, which is a lot less than what I get through the cloud VPN. So that's one of the reasons why I have it. But anyway, whenever I would try to watch YouTube through that cloud VPN, I would always get the, sign in to make sure you're not a bot message. And I think the main reason for that is because YouTube detects that the IP address that is trying to access YouTube is from a data center somewhere. And they're like, this is probably not legitimate traffic, so we are going to block it. So that was kind of my telltale sign that I was on that VPN. But then when I was trying to, go through this video downloading spree, I was running into the same issues on my home, like, my residential IP address. And I was like, oh, so I guess YouTube has some kind of mechanism to detect potentially bot-like activity and then flag the IP address for some amount of time. I don't know how long it is. I don't know what the cooldown period is. I don't know if it's like 48 hours or 72 hours or what. I mean, it's fine now. Everything's working like it used to. So I don't know what exactly that cooldown time is, but there obviously is some kind of like temporary block list or watch list or whatever that they'll put you under if you start downloading a bunch of videos all at once. So I guess let this be a lesson to anyone out there that's wanting to download a bunch of YouTube videos for either their own archival purposes or whatever your use case is. To not do a lot at the same time, do it very slowly over the course of a long period of time, and also don't let that be the only traffic to YouTube that you do, because that's kind of another telltale sign that you potentially could be a bot. But yeah, so that was just kind of something that was interesting that kind of happened in the past week that I figured I would share. So moving into kind of our main topic for the episode, getting into the benefits, challenges, and future of technology kind of on the world and society as a whole. So, when it comes to the improvements what technology has done for our lives, I think one of the most obvious ones has to be the access to information and knowledge as a whole. If you asked someone back in, say, the 60s or maybe even the 70s or early 80s, what they would think about basically having access to an encyclopedia on basically everything that exists in the world at their fingertips, they would probably think you're kind of crazy, and that would be a very, very, very large and heavy book or volume of books. But you can literally just, access Wikipedia for free. Go and search basically whatever you want, and there's almost always a Wikipedia page for it. It's kind of crazy how some of the Wikipedia pages that exist out there. So access to that kind of information is pretty incredible. I just talked about YouTube. YouTube has a ton of various tutorials and ways that you can learn, basically anything you want to do. You want to learn how to make a certain repair on your car, you can find a YouTube video for it. Do you have a washing machine that had some kind of issue and you need to look up a tutorial how to take it apart to change that specific part? There's probably a YouTube video for it. There are YouTube videos from like MIT and other like universities basically having free courseware publicly available for anyone to view and read. There are professors out there, I guess more maybe this is specifically to like computer science professors, but they have their own websites with literally the entire course material on them that you could basically access anytime you want for free. There's tons of free resources out there for anyone to basically learn any subject. So that is definitely something that I think has been a net benefit to the society as a whole, and also, one thing that you used to have to do back in the day if you wanted to, find something, is you'd have to go to the library, find the book that you wanted and then search through the book to find the passage or, source that you were looking for. But one thing that's kind of nice about the internet is if you can get a PDF copy of the book, you can basically just do this thing called Control F to easily kind of find what you're looking for, which is very nice. Another thing that has definitely been a net positive is improved communication and connectivity. There was a certain thing that happened, about like 5 years ago or so, where, the ability for people to basically call their loved ones whenever they wanted and still stay connected, even though they potentially might not be able to actually meet in person, was definitely a kind of huge net benefit for keeping people together. It also helped the business world out a lot, being able to video conference. But even before that event that happened about 5 years ago, one thing, if you worked for a very large company, you almost certainly had teams all across the globe. So being able to kind of all be in a meeting together without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars flying people across the globe just to have just to have a meeting, that's obviously not very practical. So having some kind of video conferencing software or something to kind of get everyone together is definitely a huge net benefit. Not to mention, kind of in that same vein, the enhanced productivity and efficiency that has kind of come through technology. Because now, I mean, name the software of choice that you want to basically do things for you. Accounting, I don't, you can't say for certain since I don't really do much accounting, but I can almost bet that an accountant's job is a heck of a lot easier using something like Excel than it was back, before computers ever existed and they had to do all those calculations manually by hand. Being able to just plug everything into a spreadsheet and it'll basically pump out the solution for you definitely makes their lives a lot easier. They can do a lot more work a lot more efficiently. So there's definitely, and those are just kind of a few key areas where technology has improved. I mean, we can even go into some what might not be necessarily, considered as like technology spaces like the automotive industry, right? Over the past, I would say, like 10 years or so, and maybe even before that, the demand for safety features in cars has kind of grown to the point where I would say the vast majority of cars have safety features that basically come as standard now. Whereas, 5, 10 years ago, that was probably something you'd have to option on the car and pay potentially a hefty premium for. But now, cars like Subaru and Toyotas and Hondas, they have all of these, safety features built in, things like lane keep assist to make sure you're staying in your lane. It has lane centering. Adaptive cruise control is a thing where you basically can just set the cruise control and your car will auto speed up and slow down based on traffic around it. Um, Even if you get into some of the more advanced types of cars with kind of like the self-driving type features. I mean, we literally have companies that exist now that are literally designed like Waymo. That's literally a self-driving taxi company. Basically, their business model is to be a self-driving car that basically acts as a taxi service. Which try to imagine that a few years ago. So that's now. I guess you could argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But the added safety features I think in cars is, I would say, I guess I'm mixed on that because on the one hand, it's nice because it's kind of, you have a fallback, right? Like if you have a car that has like an auto braking type feature, obviously you never want to have to use it. But in the event that you do have to use it, it's nice that you have it available to you. But at the same time, you could also argue that with all these safety features, it's made drivers a lot less attentive on the road because they think that their car is just going to do everything for them. If you've lived in the U.S., you've driven a decent amount, especially in more urban type areas, you're probably well aware of some of the lackluster driving etiquette, I guess we'll say, when it comes to some of the drivers on the road. But even if you're kind of out in the boonies, there are also some questionable instances of driver activity on the road. One of my all-time favorites is when there's literally nobody on the road and you see someone just in the left lane. That probably has to be one of my favorites. But I think we've all seen instances where someone is driving and they're on their phone or they're otherwise distracted, shall we say. And safety features in a way kind of enables that because you kind of have that sense of, oh, if I don't react quick enough, the car will save me and I don't have to necessarily worry about it. So that is, I guess, kind of two ways to look at that coin. But again, from if you are attentive and aware on the road, kind of just having that peace of mind that it's there is, I would say, kind of a net positive for at least those people that are using it appropriately, shall we say. Other areas that have been impacted, by technology in a positive way, I would say, is, e-commerce and shopping. I think Amazon has kind of revolutionized that. Nowadays, if any company can't provide 2-day shipping, they're kind of seen as like, what the heck are you even doing? Why do you even exist? I ordered my package and I want it. I want it now. Um, so I think that's kind of been a positive. Another one, this one's kind of probably more a debated one because it's also something I put in the challenges and kind of drawbacks feature as well, is social media and social connections. Now, social media is a very hit or miss. There are potentially some aspects that are a net positive, but there are a heck of a lot of negatives. Specifically, I'll focus on the positives here since we're talking about the positive impacts of technology on society, and that is keeping in touch with people that you otherwise probably wouldn't have. Now, depending on how old you are, there's a decent chance that some of the updates you get on some of your old friends is probably from seeing posts that they make on social media. Now, personally, for me, that is largely one of the only reasons that I still have my Facebook account, is because I'm interested to see, what old friends from middle school and high school are up to, that I otherwise probably wouldn't, be able to have access to kind of know what they're up to. So from that aspect, it is nice, and I think that's basically about all I have to say on it. The next one is online education and learning resources. We kind of touched on this already with kind of the access to information. But I guess the idea of online schooling, whether you want to do that or not, is up to you. I think you kind of know what my opinions are on it. But that has been around for a few years now. It's not like it's only come up, within the past like 4 or 5 years. It's been around for a while. But the ability for you to basically kind of not have to attend a school, and you can kind of do everything online at your own pace, I guess, is a blessing and a curse depending on who you are and how structured you like things to be. But if having like specific free time, like you needing to devote, certain number of hours throughout the week at specific times, for some people, especially if you work a full-time job, maybe you have a family, that can be pretty hard to do. If you have to get your butt in a seat somewhere to attend a lecture, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at say 6 p.m. after work, if you have a job and you have a family, that might be hard to do. Whereas if you can just kind of go at your own pace, work out when you have free time, that gives you a lot more flexibility to be able to do that educational path, while also, being able to learn along the way. So those are some of the positives. There's probably a heck of a lot more that I have missed. But let's move on to some of the challenges. Now, the first one is one that has been, I think, talked about a lot recently, especially with the whole rise of artificial intelligence. And that is job displacement and automation. Now, if you're under the belief that software engineers are going to be going away anytime soon, I have some bad news for you. I don't think they are. Now, maybe that's just my coping mechanism because I am one. Um, but I've seen enough from artificial intelligence to know it's got a long way to go before it replaces any software engineers. That's for sure. But there's two sides to the job displacement and automation coin, because on the one hand, you hear, oh, it's going to be terrible because it's going to put a bunch of people out of work. And that is a definite concern for sure. But I think one fantastic example to kind of prove the opposite of that is kind of the industrial revolution and kind of the revolution with farming back in the day. Because back in the day, farming was basically what your job was. If you weren't like in a big city, you kind of worked on a farm because there was a lot of labor that needed to be done, to manage the farm and everything. But then with the rise of, all the automated machinery with, tractors and all the other machine farming equipment, it basically removed the need for you to have tons and tons of farmers because these massive machines could basically do all the work for you. And you didn't need as much farmers. So it put a lot of farmers out of work. But that doesn't mean all those people just had no jobs and nowhere to go, because the industry shifted. You disrupt the market somewhere, but then that kind of opens up opportunities somewhere else. And I think that's probably what we're going to see a lot with, like, as AI kind of comes a bigger deal. Like, yeah, we're kind of seeing, like even I guess another example is like fast food places. A lot of places I think are kind of starting to switch to like these automated kiosk type things where you can just kind of go up to them and select what you want from the menu and kind of do your order that way without having to necessarily interact with a person. But getting back to kind of the technology side of things, um, anyone that thinks AI is going to replace programmers anytime soon, I encourage you to look at the quality of code that has been produced by vibe coders. And spoiler alert, it's hot garbage. And the other thing of it too is AI struggles to write code that does anything that is even remotely slightly well, I guess not remotely, but slightly complex. If your code isn't like a basic if statement or a basic getter or setter method, the AI is probably going to struggle with it. Is it going to get you code that is in the ballpark? Maybe. Is it going to send you off on a wild goose chase, going down a rabbit hole that is nowhere close to the actual solution? Probably. Is it going to throw in a bunch of added complexity that's not needed whatsoever and makes the code base even more unmanageable and harder to follow? Almost certainly. Now, I have a good example for this because one time I was trying to ask an AI how to solve a concurrency slash race condition problem. And what its solution was basically ended up being uh, sleep statements, which, if you've ever dealt with concurrency before, sleep statements is probably one of the worst ways to handle concurrency because it's gonna work like maybe 90% of the time. Maybe 95. I guess it depends on specifically what your use case is, but it's not very efficient and it's not a very good way of doing things because the problem with doing sleeps is it's basically well, I don't even want to go as far as to say it's the hello world of like concurrent programming because it's like it basically, at least in my opinion, because I was that person at one point, it's the person that doesn't know how to handle concurrency, it's their go-to solution. Because I can speak for myself when I first started writing multi-threaded applications. If there was an instance where a thread needed to wait for something and there was a potential where it would kind of run into one of these race conditions, I would just kind of throw in a sleep statement in there just to kind of delay it a bit before it then goes to try to access the resource. Now, most of the time that will generally work, but again, depending on how complex your system is, if there's other things going on your CPU, it's not going to be 100% foolproof. Which is why it's kind of the rookie example, that you really don't know how concurrency actually works, is if your solution to potential race conditions is sleep statements. Um, but the thing that made it weird is it not only did it throw in random sleep statements in there to try to fix the problem, it also threw in this completely unnecessary abstraction function that had no business being there to basically implement these sleep statements, but then it also put a semaphore in there, which was basically the solution all along to basically be notified when the other task is done for this task to start. So the need for the sleep statements and this other function was completely unnecessary because it threw the semaphore in there. Now, did its solution work? Yes, but it was so overly complex and had a bunch of garbage that it didn't need that if someone just, vibe coded that thing and then pushed it, that for all they're concerned it works, but someone coming on later trying to read through this code is going to be thinking and scratching their head like, what the heck is this person doing? Why are they using a semaphore here but also having sleep statements there, and this other abstracted function that is just implementing sleep statements for waiting? What is going on here? So this is where an actual programmer, a software engineer would need to step in, be able to analyze this, see that this AI has no idea what it's talking about, but has at least a partial solution there, and then being able to rip out all the junk and just go with what the actual solution is. And this is honestly what sets apart I guess, the newbie developers from the more, I guess, advanced developers when it comes to their use of AI and accelerating their workflows. Because the newbie developer will basically just use the AI to generate code, and as long as it gives them the output they want, they'll just move on with their day and continue on, aka vibe coding. Now, as much as I'm kind of clowning on vibe coding here, let's be real for a second. All of us other developers that grew up before the age of AI, but in the age of Stack Overflow, we did the exact same thing with Stack Overflow. Don't deny it. I know you did it because I also did it. Now, I did try, of course, to not do that as much as possible, but when you've come into a complex solution and the thing you copied and paste just works, it is kind of hard to question it and kind of think deeply. You just kind of want to move on with your life. But let's be real, we've probably all done it before, and AI is kind of that next step in that process. But yeah, so that's basically what sets apart, the newbie developer from the more, I guess, senior developer, if you will, is how they use AI to accelerate their workflow. Because, like I said, the newbie developer is just gonna plug and chug it into AI until it spits out the result that works, and they're just gonna go with it. But the more advanced developer will have it automate the boring tasks, like I have all these getter and setter functions I need to write. I don't want to write them. AI, go write those for me. And then the AI will write it. They'll kind of look it over, be like, yeah, that looks good. Put it in their code base and they'll move on. Or maybe they, have an instance like this where they're trying to, like troubleshoot some ideas, kind of, get an extra set of eyes on things, kind of, play off some ideas with the AI, or maybe they'll ask it to kind of optimize something. They'll have a kind of base solution or idea kind of formulated, and then just kind of prompt the AI for ways to improve it, ways to automate it, ways to make it a little more human readable, things like this, or maybe document their code because they're too lazy to write the documents themselves or write the comments themselves. But at the end of the day, the big difference is they actually double check the AI's work to make sure it's actually decent. And then, of course, if the AI messes up somewhere, which it probably will, they'll go in, they'll be able to identify that and make the appropriate changes. And then in the case of like writing, functions or loops or things like that for them, they'll, of course, actually kind of code review the AI to make sure what it actually generated makes logical sense, has a good flow, isn't overly complex, and things like that. So that's really kind of what sets them apart. Now, I know we're supposed to be talking about challenges here, so apologies for kind of going off on that tangent. But the next one is cybersecurity threats and data breaches. Now, cybersecurity threats and data breaches have basically exploded in the past. I don't know how many years, but it seems there was a stretch there for a while where it was like every couple weeks there was another like massive breach coming out or some massive, malware exploit or 0 day coming out. But back in the day, SSH didn't exist. This is secure shell didn't exist. If you wanted to remotely log into a server, you were using Telnet, which everything you sent to the server and everything it sent back to you was in plain text. So anyone sitting in the middle there would be able to sniff everything you're doing, and basically have a field day. But that, of course, is not the world we live in anymore. And if I guess I should preface this, if you anywhere are using Telnet, stop immediately. Don't do that. Don't be using Telnet. But malware as a whole has become a lot more sophisticated. Like the thing with some of the exploits that come out nowadays is, unless you have like a super deep understanding of like cybersecurity and all the various, because a lot of the malware that comes out these days is like exploits on exploits on exploits on exploits, which then allows you to deploy whatever you wanted to deploy. Like, it's not a simple, oh, I will just overflow this buffer and I will execute what I want to execute. You usually have to do a few different exploits and maybe even some lateral movement in order to actually get your net goal of deploying your malware or getting access to what you want to get access to. So things have become a lot more sophisticated. Back in the day, the malware of the day was a lot less, I guess, sophisticated. Like, there was, I think, I forget what the malware was, but it was basically kind of on a floppy drive. And if you inserted it into the computer, it would kind of like copy itself. And then whenever like a floppy drive was inserted that it detected the malware wasn't on, it would basically copy itself to the floppy drive and kind of spread itself that way. That's obviously very primitive compared to some of the malware we see these days. Most notably, we talked about info stealers earlier on in the podcast. You know, software specifically designed, to steal user information. I mean, there are other things too, like rootkits, keyloggers, remote access trojans, ransomware. I mean, the list goes on and on. And the thing we've also touched on before with cybersecurity, it's an arms race. As soon as the good guys come up with a protection against the bad guys' latest malware, the bad guys just make new malware. It also doesn't help that 0 days are a thing. So in case you don't know, a 0 day is essentially an unpatched vulnerability that is not known, and so it's basically only known to the person that discovered it, not like the company that created it. So Microsoft is a great example, I guess, of this. Now, obviously, other companies have had 0 days as well. Apple has had their fair share of 0 days, but Microsoft has had some pretty good ones. So essentially, what a 0 day is a threat actor, we say poking around Windows, and they see some kind of vulnerability in something. Say it's the kernel, for instance. If they pass if they run a certain type of file in a through a certain type of function in the Windows API, it'll get them maybe a shell, for instance, at with like kernel level permissions or whatever. I'm just spitballing here, making stuff up. But if Microsoft doesn't know about that exploit, that is what's known as a 0 day, because it has been 0 days since Microsoft had been made aware of that exploit. And the reason why 0 days are so bad is because the company obviously doesn't know about it, so they're not patching it. So it's just this openly exploitable vulnerability with no solution to fix it. And so that's kind of like the cybersecurity aspect. Of course, like we said, it's kind of a never-ending arms race. The next one, I guess, depending on who you are, this might even be a benefit, you could say. But the idea of social isolation and decreased face-to-face interaction. Now, a lot of companies a few years ago went fully remote. But nowadays, a lot of companies are starting to force their employees back into the office. Now, there are some companies out there that are still fully remote, and those jobs are being farther and fewer between, but also a heck of a lot more competitive because people like being able to work from home. Some would argue how much work is actually being done at home is questionable, but others would say more work gets done at home than at the office. I'll let you be the judge on which version you subscribe to. Um, but I think a lot of the psychologists out there would make the argument that not having social interaction is a detriment. The highly introverted people that don't like interacting with other human beings would say that it's a net positive, that they don't have to interact with people. So you can be on whatever side of the fence you want. I'm not going to make that decision for you, but suffice it to say, it could be seen as both a positive or a negative, depending on where you lie. The other one that probably has to be called out is the rise of, I guess, deep fakes and specifically hallucinations. When we're talking about like artificial intelligence. Now, AI has kind of advanced to the point where it can make pretty realistic pictures and videos of people. There have honestly been some pretty good ones. When it's very obvious it's for parody's sake, there have been some pretty darn good ones. But at the same time, it kind of makes you question anything you see online if it's actually legitimate or not, which is definitely, I think, a net negative. Now, in all honesty, let's be real here. Ever since the internet existed, there have always been people posting hoaxes online, for basically the memes, if nothing else. I think it was Abraham Lincoln said that don't trust everything that you read on the internet, something like that. So yeah, so it's not anything new, but AI has definitely, I think, made it worse in some senses because some of the internet hoaxes of yore were sometimes a little easy to decipher that it was being made in either sarcasm or parody or just in good fun. But the problem with AI is because of how its algorithm is, it basically what it says it believes to be accurate, whether it just made it up right there on the spot or if it's actually rooted in truth. And there's really no way for you to identify whether what it says is factual or not unless you actually have an understanding of what it's talking about in the first place. Which is why AI is so bad if you're just starting out trying to understand a topic. Because if you don't know, if you don't have any sort of idea on the topic you're asking it questions about, you have absolutely no idea if anything it just told you was true because it could have just made everything up or made part of it up. You have no idea. And the one big example I like to point to here is if you don't believe me, go start pestering and interrogating an AI on a subject area that you are very, very smart on, and you will quickly identify it just will randomly get stuff completely wrong. And the whole kind of facade of AI being this super smart thing that always has the right answer fades pretty darn quickly. Um, but, back in the day, Wikipedia kind of served this role. Like, if you grew up in kind of like the earlier ages of the internet, when Wikipedia was kind of first starting, you probably heard the phrase in your various school classes that you shouldn't be using Wikipedia because Wikipedia isn't a reliable source. Well, I would argue that comparatively to AI, Wikipedia is pretty dang reliable. Now, sure, every now and then you'll find something on Wikipedia that isn't necessarily up to date. But I will say, as morbid as it is, Wikipedia is very quick on the draw to update its pages when someone dies. Because, like, I can't tell you how many times I heard, a story about, some famous person dying, and like I go search to see if like this is actually true. And then, Wikipedia will be right there and it already has changed all the is's to was's. And it's like, my gosh, these people are fast. But anyway, yeah, so LLMs and AI as a whole, you really have to have a strong background in what you're asking it in order to make the most use out of it, because again, you have no idea if what it's telling you is actually legit or not unless you kind of do your own due diligence to kind of fact check it yourself. So yeah. The next one, kind of in the same vein of social isolation, is back to social media. Now, I touched on in the positives some of the positives of social media, but now we kind of get into the negatives. Specifically, social media has kind of been it's been tied to mental health issues among young people. Now, one of the most common arguments against social media probably has to be kind of the addictiveness of it and, kind of the mental health side effects of it. Now, it also should be noted for the record that there have been numerous former Facebook employees that have admitted that the platform was designed specifically to manipulate people's brains in order to make it more addictive. Now, if that kind of doesn't tell you what the MO of, social media sites like Facebook is, or I guess Meta now because they also own other social media sites, I think it's pretty clear from that they're intentionally trying to make their platforms as addictive as possible to keep you on them as long as possible so they can harvest as much data on you as possible so they can sell as much data on you as possible to make as much money as possible. And it's not, specifically just Facebook here, it's other social media sites too, like TikTok is another egregious offender of this. I mean, first, TikTok's content is just kind of hot garbage in general, but its business model isn't much better than Facebook's. But there's also kind of the argument that, well, I guess when it comes to social media in kind of a whole, there's that camp, that's like, oh, social media is bad because the mental health aspects. And whenever I kind of hear that argument, I can't help but think of the meme where it's the "we are not the same" meme, where it's like you don't like social media because you see the mental health impacts, the negative mental health impacts it has on people. I don't like social media because of its data harvesting and privacy invasive, features or whatever. We are not the same. Now, also, it should be noted that we're both against social media, so we're basically on the same team. Um, but kind of the mission objective, I guess, is a little bit different. Um, but I guess kind of going back into the, I guess, the social isolation aspect, not necessarily specifically only in the business world with like people working remotely, because obviously, if you're working remotely, you're not having really interactions with coworkers unless you have like video conferences with them. You're not like, stopping by their desks or having the, as they say, the water cooler talk, if you will. But social media also kind of has that social isolation aspect as well because I forget the exact quote, but it's something to the effect that we're more connected than ever, but also more isolated than ever. Basically, referring to the point that you can basically go on your social media platform of choice and see and interact with people from all over the world, yet at the same time you're still home alone in your house, doom scrolling. I guess is kind of the argument. But again, it also kind of goes back to what your preferences are, because yes, some people might think that it's more socially isolating, but you also have to understand that not everyone is a social butterfly. Some people don't like going out and interacting with people because that's just not their jam. That's not to say they're like antisocial or anything like that. They just don't like, interacting with large crowds of people. So I guess to each their own, but that is a common, gripe that gets brought up. So I figured that I'd mention it here since we're talking about some of the downsides of technology. Now, for the last few minutes that we have, I wanted to, I guess, briefly touch on the part that will age like fine milk, that being the future of technology. Now, AI might not be the best for providing factual information or functional code, but what it does actually do pretty well is analyzing and automating data analysis, or basically parsing through any large amounts of data, and kind of giving you, I guess, the highlights. Which there's a lot of good memes out there. In this being one of the primary uses for AI is we don't have to read the large emails that people send to us because we'll just use AI to, summarize it for us. And then, kind of on the flip side, you have people saying, "Oh, we don't have to worry about writing these large emails to send out to customers since we can just, have the AI write it for us." So you basically have AI writing emails and AI summarizing emails that AI wrote. So kind of a meme there. But it is very good at taking, large pieces of data and finding, patterns, similarities, and discrepancies in that data. Now, of course, you probably still want to kind of do some double checking of things. But that is one of the nice things when you're working with large data sets, is if you're working with, say, a very large data set and you're asking the AI to find similarities, patterns, and discrepancies, while it might get a couple things wrong, it's probably going to be correct enough that you're still going to be able to identify the trends that exist in the data. Now, will you kind of want to go back and maybe do your own due diligence to confirm some things? Yeah, probably. But it should be at least good enough that you'll be able to, I kind of get the general sense of, what the data is trying to talk about, and kind of be able to draw some conclusions from that. And then, of course, maybe double check a couple things just to kind of get a sense of it. Um, the other potential impacts is one thing that was kind of, I think it might have even been brought up in Apple's keynote a while back when they all they talked about was 5G. You remember that keynote a few years ago? Um, but there was something around that time when 5G was really becoming a thing, which it's still not really a thing, but that's neither here nor there. Um, the one of the, I guess, promises of like 5G and millimeter wave was, such high speed connections that, doctors would be able to essentially be in somewhere, potentially on the other side of the continent or something, and be able to perform surgery remotely, through like some kind of internet connection like that, even if it's on cellular, because they were touting 5G at the time. And the latency would be so small and so little that they could, do those very precise movements and incisions and all the other stuff that comes with doing surgery. So I think that maybe not with 5G, but that kind of like remote kind of healthcare type support thing will probably become a little more widespread. And I think just kind of in general, using technology as a whole to better automate and kind of analyze various types of scientific and medical data is probably going to be kind of another trend that we'll see. And then I don't, as annoying and cheesy as it is, I don't necessarily think that AI is going to be going away anytime soon. I think a lot of big companies have sunk a lot of money into it that they want to kind of at least get their return on their investment, I guess you could say. Um, so as others have pointed out, if you think about it, unless there is a serious regression, today and yesterday was basically the lowest point of AI, and today is the newest lowest point. So basically, every subsequent day, it's only going to get better from here. Is kind of the argument. It kind of also goes back to the Apple Silicon debate, where it's like, the M1 chip is amazing and it's, fantastic and basically does everything you want, and just think this is as worse as it's going to get. It's only getting better from here, and we've absolutely seen that over the past few years. So I think it's going to be kind of the same thing. As far as it goes with like AI getting more accurate, I'm still skeptical. I think it's kind of gotten to, I don't want to say it's plateaued per se, but it's kind of gotten to the point where I keep hearing about new models and new things being released. But every time I kind of play around with these large language models, they always run into the same issues that the previous ones ran into. Now, maybe that's because the use case I use it for, that being more like programming type specific, because that's what my background is and that's where I can poke the most holes in it. Because as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the problem with AI is it's so good at making stuff up very confidently that unless you know what you're talking about and know what you're asking it and being able to easily identify when it's, basically telling you something that isn't true, you have no way of knowing if what it's telling you is true. Like, for I guess another example for this is I'm obviously a very technologically savvy person. But for instance, if I asked it some kind of, like, say, medical question or biology question or something like that that I have very little to no background knowledge on, I have absolutely no way of knowing if what it's telling me is actually legit or not. And it's the same thing with people asking it technology questions or, new programmers asking it programming questions. You basically have no idea to know if it's actually legit or not. Now, I will say, with programming, it's a little bit easier to know if it's legit or not because all you have to do is run the code that it generates and see if it actually works. Now, again, that's not going to catch everything. Like I said, it might have thrown in some garbage in there that makes absolutely no sense, and there's a bunch of fluff and extracurriculars that absolutely don't need to be in there. But that is one nice thing about, programming and some of the other sciences is there is a definitive answer. If you know what the end result will be or should be, and the what you ask the AI gives you that end result, it's pretty easy to see that, okay, yes, its solution is actually, at least it actually works. Whether it's the best or not, that's open for debate, but at least it actually works. And I guess to go a little bit more off topic here, as we're kind of already off the rails, that was one of the reasons why I liked computer science growing up. As much as I didn't like school, the nice thing about computer science was it was very easy to tell if you got the right answer because if your program spit out the result that it was supposed to, it worked. There was no kind of ambiguity and guesswork of did I, think of the exact symbolic reason that the professor or teacher was thinking about this specific passage. There's no guesswork. Does your program give the result that it's supposed to? No, then you're wrong. Yes, okay, then you're right. Now, is your solution necessarily the best? Maybe, maybe not. But at least it works, and that was kind of one of the nice things about computer science is, but I guess that's kind of the other thing too is that because there are so many different ways to solve the problem, it gives you kind of the creativity to come up with your own solution, but also the certainty of knowing if your solution actually works. So that is kind of nice. I guess you could argue it's the same thing with math and physics and other kind of sciences like that as well. Because if you know what the answer, well, I guess that is one of the trickier parts about, like math and physics and stuff, is if you don't know what the answer is, you potentially can't necessarily verify if your work is correct, which I guess is a little bit different in computer science in the sense that usually when you're writing a program, you have in mind what you're trying to solve for, whereas in something like, math or physics, you know what you're trying to solve for, but you don't necessarily know what the answer is, if that makes sense. So, like, yeah, you might be trying to solve for, a projectile motion equation. Like, okay, the ball was shot at, this exit velocity and at this angle, and sure, you can calculate where it's going to land, but if you mess up somewhere, you don't necessarily know if you got, the right answer or not. Whereas in computer science and programming, it's a little bit different because you generally kind of know that, unless I guess you're trying to implement, some kind of equation like that, like a physics equation or something. But generally speaking, you know what the output should be, right? Like if you want to make sure that your function or your algorithm sorts everything in descending order, it's pretty easy to verify if your code actually sorted everything in descending order. Like you generally have a pretty straightforward laid out criteria of what success looks like. So I don't really even know how we got off onto this topic, but we are a little bit over on time. So I think I am just going to cut my rambling there and get back to our trivia question before we wrap up for today. So, this week's trivia question is: what year did the first public demonstration of a mouse controlling a computer occur? So, again, what was the year that the first public demonstration of a mouse controlling a computer occur? If you said 1968, congratulations, you got this week's trivia question correct. And yeah, back in the day, mice definitely weren't as common as they are today. Now, there are absolutely some people that still are advocates of basically only using a keyboard. There are things like tiling window managers and Vim exists, and if you only use a keyboard, you can definitely be very, very quick with it, but there's, I think, a lot more of a learning curve there than when just using a standard mouse, I guess. But I thought that was interesting. But that's going to do it for this episode. So if you enjoyed it, definitely be sure to leave it a rating and review and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Be sure to share it around with friends and family members. And if you have any questions, comments, ideas, or topics for future episodes, or if you have any questions about this episode, if you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below. Or if you're on a podcast platform, you can shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. The link for that is in the show notes as always. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bool nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.